Alright, so you want to learn how to summarize a story, right? Well, that's what this video is for. So if you're one of my students, you're a student watching this because it's been recommended to you, or you're just a teacher in general and you want a refresher, welcome to my video, okay? Today, we're going to talk about two specific big topics here. The first being, how do you actually do a Freytag's pyramid plot chart, which, some people probably know what that looks like. It looks like one of these. Yep, that's a thing. It's called Freytag's pyramid. And then the second part of the video, we're actually going to go over my general writing rules with how do you actually create a summary, okay? This is going to be a somewhat lengthy video, so make sure you're actually paying attention and stay with me here, okay? All right, now if you are taking the notes alongside me because you are continuing the series of videos from the last set of notes that I've been doing, your table of contents probably looks like this, and it doesn't have updated information on it. So we're going to go ahead and update our table of contents here. Okay. If you guys remember in the previous set of videos and notes and everything, we were talking about elements of a story, and then we also did figurative language stuff. We did the intro to figurative language, which we're going to revisit. So the figurative language content, let's see, this will be page 11. For me, this is going to be page 12. Okay. Update page 12. We're going to call this plot tracking. Keep in mind, if this is one of the first videos that you've seen, these videos are a much more condensed version of what I actually do in my real classroom. I'm trying to get through this content as quick as possible, so if there's anything that seems a little quick, go back and re-watch, because I'm going to go through pretty quickly. Page 13 is going to be summary creation tips. We'll talk more about that later, but just so you know, for my summary creation tips, it's starting to bleed into the tips that I give for universal writing. So some of those things might collide a little bit. I would highly suggest, if you get something valuable out of that section of notes, I would highly suggest watching my universal writing tips video when it becomes available. I have not taught that lesson yet, but it will be coming in the future. So, plot tracking, okay? There's so much to talk about here. We just kind of have to jump in and get right to it, all right? So, this is an introduction to plot tracking. If you were watching the previous set of videos where I was talking about plot with elements of lit, I specified in that series of notes or videos where there are different ways to create a story, and then there are different ways to track a story. And in my classroom in particular, I use Freytag's pyramid, which, everyone calls it, some teachers call it a plot chart, and that's what it looks like. It's that thing, if you guys have seen that before. The real name of it is Freytag's pyramid, and that's the technique that I choose to teach. So, all right, let's just jump right in and get to it, okay? What are we doing today? We're talking about how to track a plot, in particular, how to track a story. Okay, why do you need to know how to do this in the first place? Obviously, as students, you need to know how to track a story. You need to know how to summarize a story. That should be kind of a given. I usually go into like a longer rant with my own students, but I figured it kind of get the point here, okay? At the advanced level, this is an academic skill that translates into the real world because it helps you become a more attentive person. Okay, I don't know how you feel, but when I was a student and I was learning math, no offense to any math teachers watching this, but when I was a student in math, I would never be able to understand why like foiling or why complicated formulas were something that I needed in the real world. And my math teachers were always like, oh yeah, you're going to need it. It'll teach you how to think differently. And that never really worked. As an English major, an English teacher, I have never had to do complicated math my whole life, and feels great, man. So for this, though, I will say understanding how to properly summarize something will help you be more attentive to minute details in the real world. At least I think it does. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Who knows? You tell me in the comments. I usually ask my students this question: why is it important to factually summarize something, like in the real world, not for school? Most of my kids end up telling me something like, oh, it's really important to summarize factually because you need to make sure that you're giving accurate information. Exactly, okay? I think everyone understands that to the most basic level. You need to be able to give accurate information, but the average person is not very good at doing that. So in my classroom, I love to talk about psychology, and I talk about how many years I've studied psychology and all that other good stuff. And I always bring up the study that I found in 2010 by Scientific American by these two authors. These two researchers were doing a study project on eyewitness testimony, and they found that eyewitness testimony was found unreliable 73% of the time in 240 cases or 239 cases. Yeah, that's pretty bad, 73% of eyewitness testimony is thrown out. Okay, and if in case you're a student who doesn't know what eyewitness testimony is, that's when you get called into a court or a police station, whatever, and you are told to identify someone. You are told to explain your account of something that happened, something like that, right? There's another study that, or another social experiment that a college professor did years ago, where this college professor would have like a lecture going on in their room, and they would have somebody burst into the room and like flip over a chair and scream, and then they would take the professor's purse or whatever and then run away. And the professor would ask every single person in there, "What did you see?" And they would get completely different answers from everybody. And part of that is because human beings in general project their own biases, their own stereotypes, their own experiences, their own perceptions onto whatever it is that they're looking at. Okay, the average person is not well trained when it comes to noticing minute details, and that can make for some problems in a lot of different industries and stuff. So what is the practical value of knowing how to summarize something? It makes you more attentive in general. Okay, now keep in mind that it takes years to develop that as a skill. This is not going to be something that you can get in like a year of just like hammering out as many summaries as possible. It doesn't work that way. So besides talking about summaries in general, I also show this video right here, which is a video from the Sandy Hook Promise named Evan, or even Evan, I don't know. If you have the time, I would encourage you to go on YouTube and just look up Sandy Hook Promise and just go watch that video and enjoy it for what it is. It's a video that basically demonstrates how people don't pay attention to what's right in front of them, things like that. So I showed that video just to kind of demonstrate this concept. Okay, anyway, plot tracking. Let's get to the meat of this video. We're going to start off with some basic definitions. So right here, I'm going to create a new section. Going to call that basic DEF, basic definitions. Okay, and I only have 2 of them this time. The first one is called subtext. Subtext. And then I also have this definition, dramatic structure. My definition for dramatic structure is a little muddy, just so you guys are aware. I'm trying to oversimplify it here. Okay, so what is subtext? Subtext is basically hidden information in the story that only the reader, meaning you, can access. So one more time, this is hidden information. Hidden information that only the reader can access, or reader can get, if you want to say that. I'll squeeze that in there. Okay, this is hidden information that only the reader can access. So what does subtext look like? Okay, this is really easy to do with Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is a dirty old man who loves to just put inappropriate jokes in basically all of his work. Usually I'll like save a couple of examples that are pretty mild for my classroom, but it's a little hard to demonstrate because nobody's in the room. So let's see. The only way I can really describe it is if you watched that Sandy Hook Promise video and you understood what you were supposed to see by the end of the video, that knowledge right there is subtext. Okay, subtext is hidden information that only you can access. And once you have that information, it's like knowing an inside joke. You always get the inside joke, right? It's kind of like that. You need to see underneath the underneath to see what is truly being represented or shown, whatever. That's what subtext is. Once you have that knowledge, it will fundamentally change a story for you because you'll know what to look for or something like that. All right. Dramatic structure is kind of an old term that people use to describe a stage play as being like 5 acts. So I just say old term. If you haven't seen a stage play before, I'm sure every single person watching this has, though. An old term that says stories are 5 acts. Again, if you're another English teacher watching this, you're probably like, that's not what that means. Yeah, I'm oversimplifying the definition here. And dramatic structure is really referencing like the actual structure of a plot, but I'm trying to make it simple here. So, okay, now we're going to move on to the real meat and bones of this lecture, which is Freytag's pyramid. But before we do Freytag's pyramid, we have to back up a little bit and talk about history. That's another thing I never liked about math, because my teachers would never give me background information for who or what invented these formulas, and it didn't make any sense to me. Okay, so take a look at this PowerPoint slide. You guys have probably seen this guy before. His name is Aristotle. Aristotle is an ancient Greek philosopher who was obviously really, really smart and invented a bunch of ideas and whatever. Spoiler alert, the guy was also horribly racist. He said that the Greeks were the most superior version of humanity on the planet, and that Europeans and anyone below Greece were basically just inferior human beings because of climate and all this other stuff. Whatever. He was horribly racist, but he was also really, really smart. And he's commonly taught in a lot of schools for many different reasons. Anyway, Aristotle, back in the day, said that stories all have 3 major parts. They have beginning, middle, and end. Okay? Think about it logically for a second. All stories have 3 parts, beginning, middle, end. Does that formula work with modern storytelling? Think about like stories like Interstellar, Inception, Tenet, The Matrix. Think about Star Wars. Think about Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, Max Payne, whatever. Think about stories that occur nowadays. Are they all that simple? The answer is no. Okay, especially if you guys have already seen my Elements of Lit notes and you've seen me talk about Cloud Atlas and House of Leaves and things like that, that should be like an easy no. All right, fast forward to 1863. In 1863, you have this German playwright, this dude whose name is Gustav Freytag. And Freytag was basically like, hey, bro, Aristotle's system is cool, but it sucks. And instead of 3 parts, I'm going to make it 5 parts because that's just what I do. All right. So Gustav Freytag published this book, novella, whatever you want to call it. He published this piece of work called, and keep in mind, I can't speak German. So it's Die Technik des Dramas, which I think is the technique of drama. I actually have read the technique of drama. So that's how I know all this stuff firsthand. I've studied his work, whatever. He basically came up with a 5-part model, and a lot of teachers ended up calling that Freytag's pyramid or a plot chart. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Freytag's pyramid. You've probably seen Freytag's pyramid before. Again, I don't mean to insult other English teachers, but a lot of English teachers refer to it as a plot chart, and they make it seem like it's this thing that is used in schools, when in reality this was a real concept invented by a real writer who was critiquing dramatic structure. Okay, what am I going to do in my notes? I'm going to draw a picture, and we're just trying to draw like a simple little version right now because we're going to dive into all this stuff as the video plays out. I apologize if I'm speaking really fast. I'm just trying to get through this video as quickly as I can. So if it seems like I'm out of breath, it's because I am. So and again, no offense to any English teachers that are watching this video. Like I said, I have read the technique of drama. I've studied it. And this is why, like, I'm probably going to be a little controversial here because I'm going to critique things that I've seen in the teaching world that I do not like. So if you don't like me throwing in commentary about things I don't like from the student perspective, then sorry. Anyway, take a look at this. There are a lot of students that have seen things like exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, my results in terms of teaching, as far as like how many kids have seen these bottom two portions, the inciting incident and the catastrophe, very, very, very mixed. I've never met a student that's ever done catastrophe. I've sometimes met students that know what inciting incident means. I'm going to teach you all of the steps, okay? Keep in mind, I'm not perfect at this either. There are a lot of other teachers that are way better at this than I am. I'm just giving you my perspective. I don't mean to bash on anybody. All right, cool. So we're going to draw a little diagram. Looks like that. Bam. Now we're going to move into actually what it is. So we're going to cover every single step of this process, and hopefully I'm going to clear the air for some people. If you guys have done, if you're watching this video and you've done a plot chart before, hopefully some of the definitions I give you are going to clear the air with some common misconceptions in the teaching world. IMO. I hope that makes some sense. I don't know, man. We're just trying to do this quick here. Okay. Exposition. I've seen a lot of people refer to exposition or the first step as being the beginning of the story. That is a terrible definition. Don't use that definition. Exposition is not the beginning of the story sometimes. Look at like the cases of Kill Bill or any Quentin Tarantino film. Exposition is supposed to be the background information that makes the story able to function. It is the background info that sets the chessboard so you can actually play chess, okay? So for my definition, I'm going to write down background info that makes, you could say makes the story possible, makes the story functional, makes the story able to happen, whatever works for you. Background info that makes the story function or functional, whatever you want to say, okay? It's all the same thing. Remember, if you're taking notes and you're following along with me, you should be taking notes in a way that you understand them. So I'm going to try and summarize all these definitions as best I can. Exposition is the background information that makes the story able to happen. Again, that is not always the beginning of the story, or at least that's a weak definition for what exposition truthfully is. It's supposed to be background information to establish something, okay? Now, some examples. Let's talk about Star Wars. If you've never seen Star Wars, I'm going to like fill you in here really quick. In the first Star Wars film, which is now called Episode 4, A New Hope, the first Star Wars film, you have a main character named Luke Skywalker. Everyone's probably seen Luke Skywalker before, right? He's this dorky little teenager that works on a farm, and he's like, I have farmer things to do, right? Good for Luke, okay? Before you even meet that little prepubescent teen, you have this like 25-minute segment where, or like 10-minute segment, I don't know what it is, where you have like a starship that's trying to escape another spaceship, and then you have a villain who's boarding the spaceship, and he's killing people, and he's interrogating people, and you have a princess who's trying to run away, and you have robots that get something really important that are trying to run away. Like, you get all this other information before you even meet the main character. All of that stuff, including like the text crawl that, you know, goes that way on the screen, all of that stuff is exposition because it's giving you the background information that makes the story make sense. It makes the story functional. It makes it happen, okay? If you just started the movie with Luke Skywalker, you would be so immensely confused as to what is happening and why it's happening, and you would have to go through this mental like hurdle with Luke to try and figure out his purpose, which, like, does that work as a story standpoint? Sure. But that's not what that story was going for at the time, okay? Another example would be like Game of Thrones. I keep looking at my Game of Thrones map. Game of Thrones is obviously a really complicated story, and before you even meet some of the main characters in Game of Thrones, you have like, it's like a 15-minute segment in the first episode of the first season where you just have some like random characters that are getting killed off by like a mysterious force, right? Well, they do that to not only create tension and show like a threat, but they also do that to establish certain rules of the universe, like there's magic or there's zombies or whatever. You know, it's just the background information, okay? Makes the story happen. And as I said on my PowerPoint slide, just in case you want to pause it here and look, the exposition can be jump-started through a character dialogue, flashback, text crawl. It could be the death of a character. It could be a lot of different things, right? Like, that's how Hamlet begins. Hamlet begins with these two guards who were talking about somebody who was killed. And, like, a ghost shows up and, like, things happen. Oh, no. Okay, moving from the exposition to the inciting incident. Inciting incident. So the inciting incident is going to be the specific event that kicks off the conflict. It starts the conflict, okay? Just in case you need to see my little diagram here. Once again, that is the specific event that you could say initiates the conflict, that starts the conflict, that kicks off the conflict. It's all the same thing. Specific event that initiates the conflict. I'm going to use big words this time. I didn't use big words with my students. Okay. So the inciting incident is the specific thing that kicks off the journey, kicks off the adventure. This could be a main character who's maybe realizing their purpose. It could be a character being told a problem, whatever. If you're going to go on the journey route, then that makes a lot of sense if you ever study the hero's journey, which we talk about later in my class. Okay, the rising action. I've seen a lot of teachers, no offense, I've seen a lot of teachers refer to the rising action as like the part where the action gets intense. I don't like that definition. I think that's a terrible definition. The rising action is supposed to be the portion of the story where the conflict of the story, meaning like types of conflict, are fully revealed to the characters and the audience. So think back to like conflict with the elements of lit notes. This is where the conflict is fully laid out for everybody who is experiencing the story. At least your protagonist should have a very good idea of what's at stake at this point. Okay. So I'm going to say the rising action is... So for rising action, again, you can say part where the action gets intense. But a better definition is going to be conflict is fully revealed. Or at least like 90% of the conflict is out there. Okay. For the next thing, you're going to have the climax, okay? Again, no offense. I've seen a lot of teachers refer to the climax as the height of the action. I don't like that definition at all. I think it's terrible. If you read The Technique of Drama by Gustav Freytag, it's kind of selling it short a little bit. The climax of the story is supposed to be a major turning point for your character or characters. It's a major turning point. So that's all I got to say. Major turning point for good or bad. Major turning point for characters. Okay. So think of it this way. You have the inciting incident. So now your character is on a conflict. They experience what the conflict is. And then, boop, they have some kind of turning point. That could be the death of a character. Maybe your protagonist gains an item that helps them. Maybe they gain a power. Maybe they realize their destiny. You know, could be a bunch of different things. In the case of Star Wars, if you're watching Star Wars Episode 4, Luke Skywalker has a mentor character who is killed. And when the mentor character is killed, Luke goes, "No!" And in that 4 seconds of him going, "No!" he finally hits puberty and he realizes that he has to be the big boy to do everything. And then that's the turning point for him as the protagonist. He takes charge of the story, basically. So there you go. It's a major turning point for a character. I usually give like a quick little anecdote from the Flight of Icarus here, but it would take too long, so I'm going to skip it here. If you guys know, if you know what the story of the Flight of Icarus is, You know how Icarus flies up and then his wings burn and he starts to fall? Get it? It's a turning point because the next step is called the falling action. But if you didn't laugh at that joke, then I'm sorry. Okay, for the falling action, this is going to be really similar to the rising action, except it's the opposite. So the falling action is where the conflict is starting to come to a close. So conflict is starting to close. This is usually like a final fight scene. It could be, if you think about Avengers Endgame, in the end of Endgame, when the Avengers headquarters is blown up and there's just like rubble everywhere, which effectively has just made a flat battleground for basically everybody. That, you know, if you've seen that movie, the falling action is like establishing the final scene. Okay, it's going to be something like that. And just in case you need to see the PowerPoint slide. Now, the falling action is going to lead you to this thing called the catastrophe. The catastrophe is like a really terrible event or something like that. So look at it this way. If the inciting incident kicks off the conflict, then the catastrophe is going to be the thing that closes the conflict. So the catastrophe, say specific event that closes the conflict. This is going to be like the final punch, the final stab, the final kiss, the final joke, the final throw, the final point. It's going to be something like that to close out the actual conflict of the story. Okay. I used to demonstrate it like this to my kids, if you can see here on the camera. So the inciting incident is this dotted line and the catastrophe is that dotted line. You can imagine it like this, that all of the conflict of your story is in the center here. Can't really shade with a pen, but hopefully my point gets across here. All of that stuff in the middle is basically the core conflict of the story, which is like the main movement for your characters in terms of growth. Okay. Now the last term that you have is called the resolution or denouement. I would really prefer if you were to write down both words because I've seen teachers use both of them before. So I'm going to have both of them here just to cover my butt. Okay. Now, once again, I also don't like how I've heard other teachers teach this before. I've seen a lot of people be like, it's the ending of the story. No, it's supposed to be the resting period after the conflict has already been concluded. So it's supposed to be a moment of reflection for your characters or a moment of respite for your characters where they're talking about everything they just went through. If you're watching like a sports film, in like most stereotypical sports film fashion possible, usually this is like a coach and a player, or a player and like a significant other who are walking down a hallway and they're reminiscing about something that happened. Or in the case of Harry Potter, in basically the end of every single Harry Potter book, it's Harry laying in a hospital bed talking to Dumbledore about how much he just broke school rules for the year. That's basically what it is. So it's a period for the characters to rest and reflect. So for your definition, resting period after the conflict. And again, if that seemed like it went by really, really quick in terms of notes, it's just because I'm trying to get the video done fast. All right. Now for my last section that I have here, I have a piece of advice for you, a tip. Okay. So, I guess I should have put an arrow here. Whoops. When it comes to Freytag's pyramid, it does seem a little daunting at first, but I can guarantee you that once you practice it a few times, most of my students who have been doing this get so good at it that eventually they just stop having to worry about it because they just get it. Okay. So I have a little diagram right down there. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Okay. If you've ever had a teacher give you a plot chart like this, and they've said, okay, you need to map out the story, all right? here's kind of a problem with doing it from left to right, okay? I've seen a lot of kids do this over time, and I'm not really sure why. Actually, that's a lie. I do know why. It's because they're not following my advice. Basically, here's what I need you to imagine. So I have a plot chart right here. Okay, whatever. Let's just pretend that this black marker represents a perfect 100% correct answer to the story. This is the true version of the story, right? I've seen a lot of kids mess up in two different ways when they try to do Freytag's pyramid from left to right. Okay, I've seen a lot of students do this. I've seen a lot of students do this. All right. Now, if you're in my classroom, I usually ask my kids, what do you think is happening here? And, you know, I try to get a few guesses before I explain it. But since we're just watching a video tutorial of me on YouTube or whatever, I just have to spell it out for you, okay? If the black line represents a true 100% correct answer, then this is what happens if you're just trying to fill out Freytag's pyramid from left to right or right to left, whatever. If you're trying to do it in order. I've seen a lot of kids who will either overshoot the climax or undershoot the climax, and they'll miss the target a little bit, okay? Now, that's my first piece of advice. I want you to do Freytag's pyramid in a certain order. I think it's easier if you do it in the order that I have for you, okay? So I have my little diagram right here, okay? This is what I recommend you do. And again, this isn't perfect. It doesn't work for everybody. But I have started doing this with my students, and it has great success, okay? Do Freytag's pyramid in this order. Don't go left to right. Don't go right to left. So this is basically what you need to imagine. My character starts here in the exposition, right? They start here. I know my character ends over here in the resolution or denouement. They start here, they end here. What is the turning point that gets them from A to B? What is the turning point that gets them from here to here? That's the climax. And keep in mind, while that does sound really simple, here's the other piece of advice you need to understand. This system is not perfect, and your interpretation of the story can be different from other people. For example, when we watch the short animated film The Dam Keeper here in my classroom, sometimes I'll have students that come up with like 3 different climactic points that could be the turning point for the main character. All of those points are correct, because what matters at the end of the day is, can you argue your climax? The only reason why I suggest doing it in this order, though, is because you're going to be thinking about character motivation, characters' actions, and things like that, and you're going to get a pretty good judgment of what the climax actually could be. Again, if you're just doing it from left to right, the problem with that is that kids will either overshoot or undershoot where events in the story fall, and then usually what ends up happening, like just to kind of tell you from real experience here, if kids are doing this from left to right, usually what ends up happening is when they get to the falling action and catastrophe, they usually like are running out of things to write about because they'll aim so closely for the end of the story to be the climax. Like I said, do it this way. My character starts here, my character ends here, so 1, 2, 3, okay? What is the turning point that gets my character from start to finish? It's the best piece of advice I can give you. Also, understand that Freytag's pyramid is a tool. It does not work for every single story, and it doesn't work for everybody, okay? I just recently saw the Christopher Nolan film Tenet. If you have not seen Tenet before, I highly recommend that you go watch it. If you have ever heard of the movie Inception, if you're one of my kids that's seen Inception before, Christopher Nolan is the guy who made that movie, and that movie was incredible. Just showing you the poster for it real quick. Okay, Tenet, right? If you see this movie is immensely complicated, and you cannot easily make a plot chart for it. You have to make your own plot chart. And when I was watching the movie, I was like, man, this would not work with Freytag's pyramid. I'd have to make up my own system here. And when I was imagining the movie, I was imagining it basically like this, because at one point in the movie plays itself backwards. Basically, the plot plays itself backwards. So I was trying to like think of a plot chart that would work with this, and that was about the only thing I could come up with. Was like a plot chart that inverts itself. But you see, like, that's just how it is in the literary world. You have to make up your own tools sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how it is. Okay, so that first chunk of the video is plot tracking. How do you actually track the plot in a story using Freytag's pyramid? This is going to be pretty comprehensive for you. Hopefully some of the definitions that I gave you cleared some of the air if you guys have ever had difficulty with that. Okay, now moving on. In my classroom, when my students are performing Freytag's pyramid, they have to fill out a document that looks like this. They have to analyze all the elements of a story. They have to pull out 3 conflict types, and they have to give me 3 symbols, and they have to give me a character list, what happens to the characters and what ends up happening to them in the end. They have to do the full Freytag's pyramid, a paragraph summary, and they have to give me 2 themes. That sounds like a lot of work, right? I can do this myself in about 5 minutes. If you give me a story to read and I read the story, I just be like, boom, done. Okay. Most of my students will be able to do, like, once they actually perfect this entire system and they understand everything, most of my kids can do this in about 20 to 30 minutes. And they can successfully analyze a story like that. So the goal here is to basically have 1 bullet point for each section of Freytag's pyramid. You take your bullet points and you turn them into a paragraph summary. All right. Now, this is what this section is going to cover. It's going to cover how do you actually write a summary in the first place. Keep in mind that my summary tips are going to bleed into my writing tips. We're going to talk about writing in general here. I'm going to give you some demonstrations and so on and so forth. Creation tips. Sorry if I'm just rambling or talking a lot. It's been a long day. It's like the 4th time I've had to teach this lesson, and I'm tired right now. So, okay. Summary creation tips. I'm going to be really particular with these, so it might be beneficial for you to listen to me first, look at what I'm writing, and then look at the PowerPoint slide, because I'm not going to zoom in on the PowerPoint slides all the time. Okay, my first major tip. Before I give you that tip, we need to understand something about writing. When you were writing in my class, this is one of my writing tips. When you're writing in my class, you must create all of your writing from the angle that the reader is an idiot, that the reader does not know what's going on. Okay? Pretend that the reader has no clue what it is you're writing about, which means as a result, you need to be specific. You need to try and have specificity with everything that you talk about. So my first tip when creating a summary is always include the title, the author, and the source type. Now, I said on my PowerPoint slide, oh yeah, I did the publisher too. And then I put in parentheses, if applicable. So the publisher is cool information to have, don't get me wrong. Personally, for me, I think it really matters what kind of story you're talking about. Like if you're discussing a video game, you're more than likely going to refer to the company that made the video game rather than like the head designer, unless it's like a Hideo Kojima game because like his name is on everything. If you're going to be talking about a movie, you're more than likely going to be discussing like the director, maybe the publishing studio, like maybe you'll mention Warner Brothers. I don't know. It just kind of depends on you. Like go off of what you think sounds best. When it comes to books though, I've never really seen anybody say like the publisher of a book unless they're like specifically giving a review or giving like analytical information about it. I don't think you need to do that for a summary. Like no one's going to be like, oh yes, this book from Pantheon, written by blah, blah, blah. Like nobody really does that. At least I've never seen anybody do that. So you don't always have to say the publisher. Just make it, you do you, fam. That's where I'm trying to get at. You do you. Okay, for the author, the title, and the source type, I'm also going to add a little note here to the side where I'm going to say order doesn't matter. Order doesn't matter. Okay. The order of this information does not matter at all. What matters is, are you giving the information, period. So again, why are you doing this? The reader is an idiot. The reader has not seen what you have seen. They have not read what you read. They have not played what you have played. They haven't listened to what you have listened to. You must always be specific. You must give them this information as a basic starting point. So what I have here is a little demonstration for you. I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. Keep in mind, I'm writing an advanced example here, so just try to keep up with me, okay? If you're a high school student, this should make sense. Red Rising is a famous, no, is an award-winning science fiction novel by Pierce Brown. Boom, period. Okay, that's an okay first sentence. It's not a great first sentence, but it's a functional one. All right, Red Rising is an award-winning science fiction novel by Pierce Brown. This cutting this with a period here is going to violate my second tip that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to improve this information in a second here. But what I want you to see right off the bat is that I am giving you the title, I am giving you the source type, it's a novel, and I'm giving you the author right there. Okay, that's the information you need to have. And you, again, the order doesn't matter. You could just say, Pierce Brown is an award-winning author who created the science fiction series Boom, done. Okay, Pierce Brown is an award-winning author who created the science fiction novel series known as Red Rising. There you go. I'm giving you the exact same information, okay? So let's take this in baby steps here. I told you that that sentence sucks, and it does. I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and then we're going to move on. Before I move on, though, I do want to give you one last example. This is a short story called Searching for Summer that I used to teach my sophomores, and I no longer really teach it because it's kind of boring. But here's my example. The short story, Searching for Summer, by Joan Aiken, shows the reader, tells the reader, shares a story of whatever. There you go. There's all the information. Tip number 2. So again, the reader is an idiot. I want you to engrave that in your brain. Because the reader's an idiot and you have to basically slap them across the face with information and tell them, hey, we're doing this now in order to keep their attention, you need to give them an general overall view of whatever it is that you're talking about. So for my second tip, I'm going to say always provide reader with a general overview of the source. Now, one of my students mentioned to me today, they're like, oh, so you're creating a summary in your summary? Yes, exactly. Okay, the reader is an idiot, and you need to pretend that they are one. So in order to make that person educated on your topic, you have to ease them into it. You cannot just go up to the reader and start bashing them in the head with information and specific details and character names and like, you can't do that. It's just going to get too complicated. You're going to lose them. And if you lose the reader, then your writing doesn't really do its job, right? So here's what I have, okay? I have Red Rising is an award-winning science fiction novel by Pierce Brown. That sentence sucks. I'm going to start over, okay? Pierce Brown, Pierce Brown is an award-winning author called Red Rising, which tells the story of a rebellion on Mars in the future that erupts into a war for human rights, or a war for human equality, there you go, across the solar system. All right, good. So Pierce Brown is an award-winning author who created the science fiction novel series called Red Rising. I should put a comma there. Which tells the story of a rebellion on Mars in the future that erupts into a war for human equality across the solar system. I still don't like that sentence. Rebellion on Mars that turns into a which erupts into a war over equal human rights throughout the entire solar system. That erupts into a war over equal human rights throughout the entire solar system. Okay, that's a little bit better. And again, like, if you guys are watching that and you're like, wow, this teacher can't get it right the first time, that's why it's so important for me to actually perform these demonstrations in front of a class. I will never ask my students to do something that I couldn't do, and I will always model for them what this process looks like, assuming they always ask me for a demonstration. I usually just show them anyway, but whatever. You need to see the mental gymnastics that I'm going through to try and make a sentence that sounds good, because that is what real writing is. Real writing is never finished. You're always going to revise something that you create, and if you're an artist or a musician, you probably understand that mentality. Like, I could write this summary right now and then look at it tomorrow and be like, yeah, this is garbage, and then just rewrite the entire thing. Sometimes that's what it's like. So the example I have is this. Pierce Brown is an award-winning author who created the science fiction novel series called Red Rising, which tells the story of a rebellion on Mars that erupts into a war over equal human rights throughout the entire solar system. Good. It's a pretty solid first sentence. I didn't even actually get a word count on that one, but what is that, 39 words? Yep. All right. Lucky number. Okay. With that said, I am demonstrating these first two tips. I'm not only giving the reader basic information, being like, oh, we're going to talk about a book. Oh, what's it called? Oh, it's Red Rising. Who's it by? Oh, this author. What is it about? Bam, right there. Tip number 2. Okay. You always want to give the reader a general synopsis. And I always have this picture here as an example. Actually, I have this. The short story, Searching for Summer by Joan Aiken, tells the reader about Tom and Lily, a newlywed couple who are out on their honeymoon in an attempt to find a little bit of sunshine to brighten their day. Aw, isn't that cute? Okay, it'll make more sense later. I always show my students this picture that I've made. It's a really simple one. You have a triangle, so to speak, that follows along with this little piece of writing that I've created. So if you look right here, this is the first line of my summary, and then down here is the end of my summary, correct? So up here at the beginning, you want to start as broad as possible. Again, you cannot start beating the reader over the head with information. You need to start really, really general, really broad, and you need to ease them into things as best you can. So I'm going to say broad. I'm just going to put a little illustration right there on the side of my notes. I'm going to draw an arrow, and then at the bottom I'm going to say narrow. Okay? Remember, you want to ease the reader into the information that you now know, because you are more intelligent than the reader by reading the story. So, tip number 3. For tip number 3, this is going to sound kind of dumb. And I know there's a lot of text on the screen, but again, this is going to seem kind of dumb. But if you're going to write a summary, you need to actually summarize the entire source. Make sure you actually summarize the entire source. Make sure you summarize the entire source. The reason why I say that is because I've had many situations where students are doing their Freytag's pyramid and they fill it all out. Wonderful. Now they write a paragraph summary, right? And as they're turning these fragmented bullet point sentences into real sentences and combining ideas and flowing from one to the other, I've had a lot of kids that do this. They'll just stop right here at the climax, or they'll stop right here at the falling action, or they'll stop right here at the catastrophe, and they don't actually finish out the story. That's a problem, okay? You're not actually summarizing the entire story that way, and that means that you are not paying attention, you're missing details, or you're just being weak in general. You don't want to do that. You want to be aggressive and you want to be verbose. You want to be complicated. You want to be fully thought out. Okay. Next, it'd be like this. You know, if you are watching a movie and you have to leave the movie for 10 minutes to go to the bathroom, well, that 10 minutes could be really, really important. If you're watching a movie like Inception, 10 minutes is going to make you lost. So kind of need that information. All right, tip number 4. All right, guys, if you're watching this, we're going to enter controversial English teacher territory for a second. These are my writing tips, okay, that I give my students. I base my information off of what I hear from college professors, all of my writing books that are over there that are still current, things like that, all right? There probably will be English teachers that disagree with me on some of my writing tips, and that's totally fine because that's how the craft is. You should learn from a bunch of different people and form your own opinion. So please keep in mind this is my perspective on the issue, right? So tip number 4, do not include your own opinion in a summary. I do not give a crap what your opinion is. I don't care. I'm looking for a summary. Please tell me what the summary is. I don't want to know what you thought of it. Okay? Keep yourself out of it. So never give personal opinion. You could say do not give personal opinion. Whatever. Don't give your personal opinion. I don't care what your opinion is. It'd be like your friend, you know, asking you like, oh, wow, what was that movie about? Because you saw a really good movie. And then you're just like, yeah, it was really good. You know, that makes you sound like an idiot, right? Yes. Don't give your own personal opinion. What does this look like in the classroom? I've had situations where kids will say things like this: the great short story, the fantastic film, the confusing story. Audiences will have to see the story multiple times because it's confusing, like things like that. Don't say things like that. Now, if you're thinking back to my example, wait a second, didn't I do something like that in my example? Well, if you see right here, I said award-winning. That's not really giving my own opinion because Red Rising has won awards. It is factual information. Now, if I'm like the incredible series, Red Rising, you know, if I said something like that, that's giving my own personal opinion. And you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. Now, we had a really good conversation today with some of my kids in one of my classes who was like, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to worry about this? Because you need to have journalistic integrity. You need to have integrity, okay? The mainstream media, as everyone complains about it and calls it, is full of like people who have biases that are projected onto the news. And they do that because they get reactions out of people and thus they get money, okay? The mainstream news media is a lot of money-driven industry. And there's a reason why, if you look at CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, there's a reason why other news organizations like the Associated Press are so much better than they are. It's because the Associated Press tries to limit how much political commentary they put into their news. So, why do you want to do this? Journalistic integrity. In an ideal world, everyone would be mindful of their own biases and they would try to avoid them as much as possible while reporting only on the facts. That's not the world we live in. I usually give this example where it's like if I'm writing a research report on a subject and this is the entire truth of that subject, but I'm only giving you this much information right here, that means I'm excluding the other information, right? Which potentially means I'm giving you a certain angle or a bias towards that information. So, you know, is it possible to eliminate all bias in writing? I don't think it is possible, but you should at least be mindful of it as much as you can. Okay, try to be as factual as you possibly can when writing a summary. And again, some teachers may disagree with that. Some teachers may say it's okay. Okay, you do you, fam. I'm just showing you a way. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? All right, tip number 5. This one is linked up with number 3. So number 3, I told you, make sure you actually summarize the entire source. So tip number 5 is make sure you actually preview the entire source. Because if you don't actually preview the entire source, how can you write a summary? So tip number 5, make sure you preview the entire source. once again, if you're watching a movie and you go to the bathroom for 10 minutes, or let's just say that the popcorn at AMC, cough cough, is so bad that it gives you explosive diarrhea, and then you have to go to the bathroom for a good 30 minutes to try and repair your own body while you're aching in pain. Well, you've just missed 30 minutes of the movie, which effectively means that you cannot summarize it properly. So in order to summarize, you need to have the entire source in your brain. Okay? Why do you need to have the entire source? Because of journalistic integrity. Boom. And this leads us to our last tip, which is when you are creating a summary, in my own opinion, in my classroom, you do not give quotes. Okay? I don't want my kids to give quotes. I think that putting quotes in a summary clogs the summary up. Unless that quote is really, really short and extremely significant to the characters in some way, shape, or form, I don't think you should use quotes. There are a lot of teachers that are going to say, oh yeah, use a quote as your opening sentence in an essay. I don't recommend doing that either. The only reason why you should be using quotes is to pull out evidence for something, to analyze it, or to argue for something. Okay, so for me, I'm going to say don't use quotes. In a summary, it just makes a summary clogged. In a summary, it makes a summary clogged. Okay. Now, don't click away from that video, even though it might be tempting to do so. Okay. What I'm going to do now is do a demonstration for you where I am going to actually write out a summary. Okay. Now, I'm going to use that story. There Will Come Soft Rains. I'm going to use the story Searching for Summer because it is the story that I've been talking about most of today. So it's the freshest story in my mind. I did this in front of my students where I basically just typed out a summary and I just kind of explained my thoughts as I was going through it. And my kids were like mind blown because they were like, wow, you made it look so easy. That's because it is easy. I haven't read this story in 2 years, so I remember it enough because it's simple. So just keep up with me, all right? So the short science fiction story called Searching for Summer by Joan Aiken tells the reader about a newlywed couple named Tom and Lily who are celebrating their honeymoon by driving out into the countryside to find a little bit of sunshine. Boom. Okay, the short science fiction story called Searching for Summer by Joan Aiken tells the reader about a newlywed couple named Tom and Lily who are celebrating their honeymoon by driving out into the countryside to find a little bit of sunshine. All right, it's good. It's a good sentence. I probably could have thrown in a comma in there to make it a little bit better, but whatever. All right, moving on. When Tom and Lily leave their wedding, they drive on their scooter. They drive on their scooter through I believe it's the European countryside. To find a place they can rest and enjoy sunlight. Yeah, okay, this sentence is terrible because my first... Sorry. This is what real writing looks like, okay? I'm going to go back and modify as I'm going through this. It's about a newlywed couple named Tom and Lily who are celebrating their honeymoon. Boom. I'm going to erase that. When Tom and Lily leave their wedding, comma, they drive on their scooter through the European countryside to find a place where they can rest and enjoy a bit of sunshine. The world, the world they live in is affected by nuclear winter, so most of the sky is permanently covered in thick clouds. Yeah, I know that doesn't make sense, but that's just how the story is. Like, how could there be sunlight if there's clouds everywhere? Exactly. All right. Tom and Lily's scooter breaks down in a small town where they are forced to stay at a bed and breakfast for the weekend. They are tasked with returning a purse, I think it's a purse, to an elderly couple who live out in the middle of a dense forest outside of town. When they arrive to deliver the bag, they are invited to stay with the elderly woman and her blind husband because the journey was tiring. Tom and Lily realize that the small cottage where the elderly people live is permanently cast in a ray of sunshine, so they decide to take the leap of faith and stay. Once the weekend is over and they leave, they head back into town and retrieve their broken scooter. They decide to lie to the aggressive owner of the bed and breakfast in order to keep the small cottage a secret from prying eyes. Okay. They decide to lie to the aggressive owner of the bed and breakfast and keep the small cottage prying eyes, comma, and they set off to live the rest of their lives. All right, cool. Let's see how I did. All day today, throughout all of my classes, when I wrote this summary off the top of my head, all of my summaries were different, and all of my summaries somehow ended up being 8 sentences. So let's see how I did here. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wow. I don't know why I guess I have a type. I have a number. Okay. So that's a pretty good summary right then and there. I hope that gives like a pretty good example of what you would want to do. That seems really long. Let's see, what was that? That was actually one of the smaller summaries I wrote today. So 238 words. I think one of my other ones was 239. That would be a pretty solid summary. Now, keep in mind, there are some plot points that I glossed over in this summary. There are details that I definitely did not go into explanation for, and I just kind of briefly touched on them, like the elderly lady and her husband are blind. The owner of the bed and breakfast is aggressive, and he is so for a particular reason. But I feel like how I worded it, they keep it a secret from prying eyes, right? I feel like I'm kind of indicating what I need to indicate there. So that would be an example of a summary. Most of my students can handle doing something like that when they are given proper guidance and they are shown like, no, change this sentence, do this, do this, do this. Again, I like to model things like this in my classroom because I want to show my students the mental gymnastics that one has to go through in order to come out with a viable piece of writing. So please don't consider all of the work that you have to be complete. It is never complete. It is something that will be forever revised. I've just gotten really used to revising my work as I actually do it, which when we actually write real essays in my classroom, I always tell my kids, write your final draft the first time. You don't need to do outlines. You don't need to do brainstorming. You don't need to do any of that crap. I'm the kind of writer that likes to sit down and just be like, and just like see what I come up with. And then I edit it as I go. And that's just me. That's my style of writing. I write really well when under pressure. And that's the kind of technique that I teach in my classroom. So hopefully this video gave you something to think about. What I have shown you is how do you actually write a summary. like a paragraph summary, and how do you actually track the plot of a story. If you guys have any questions, you can obviously drop them in the comment section or send me an email if you're one of my kids and you know my email. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed. Go write some summaries. It'll help you figure things out.